When it comes to your retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you've found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic, run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave, Chase, and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today and for all the tomorrows to come. ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now.
When it comes to retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everybody else has? Of course not. You're unique, have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement, so it's time to think differently, and you're in luck today because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you're not going to find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave Lopez, Chase Lopez, and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. We've talked a lot in the last few weeks about inflation and some of the pressures it has put on people's finances. We've had Dave and Chase talk about ways to budget and ways to plan. But today we want to look into one of those more difficult situations where you might find you have to use options you know are less than ideal. Dave Lopez is here today to shed a little light on this whole situation. Dave, how's it going?
It is going great, as always. It's sure good to be back on the air with you and with the listeners. I really enjoy our time together.
It is always good to get together with you and bring a few thoughts into perspective and look at things the way you look at them. I try and keep up. And Dave, this situation is not ideal, where you might find you have to use some options that you know are less than ideal. And what do you do in this case? And tell us about what we're going to explore today.
Sure. We're talking about hardship needs. Another way to think of that, Ron, would be emergencies, right? The way I like to think of it is, no matter how well you plan for how life's going to go, a wheel falls off the car sometimes, correct?
Exactly.
Right, so we can pretend that's not the case, but that's the real world situation, right? You can be an expert gardener, for another metaphor, but you're still going to have weeds.
Yeah, things are always going to happen.
They're always going to happen, right? So we want to discuss and have discussions for when, not if, when something happens, right? Are we prepared for that, which is the ideal? And if not, what are some other solutions? Today, specifically, we're going to talk about when something happens, what we call a hardship, and you maybe have to get into your retirement accounts, right?
Well, it sounds like a really interesting topic of conversation today, so I'm looking forward to all your wisdom.
Yeah, I hope. So we can talk all day about I should have done this when something goes wrong, right? Or I could have done that. Mm-hmm. But like I used to tell my kids, that's all well and good, but we are where we are. Now, what are we going to do next?
Yeah.
Right? So it's important that we're able to take a look at how things may have panned out despite doing everything that you thought was correct, right? And then how to deal with them appropriately so you can stop future damage in the future. That's really what we're going to be talking about today. So what I'd like to do, with your permission, is let's take a look at some things that we're seeing in the economy right now at large, so folks can get a kind of a feel for the current situation, not just in their personal situation, but with respect to retirees or pre-retirees in general. How does that sound?
That sounds like a great topic of discussion for all of us, and I know that you have a recent report you want to tell us about as well.
Yeah, so there were some statistics run, right? And here's where we kind of stand as far as folks tapping into their 401ks. So just for the listeners, what we're talking about here is you've got a 401k plan, you've been saving, things are going well. As most folks know, you really can't take money out of your 401k until you retire. Or after you're 59 and a half, you can start taking withdrawals often without a penalty. But the goal is to never touch that money so it's there for retirement. Make sense?
Right. Makes perfect sense.
So today what we're going to talk about is what happens when a wheel falls off the car, you need extra money, you don't have an emergency fund set up that you can use, and you may be forced to tap into your 401k for an emergency. So here's kind of the numbers that we're seeing right now as of 2023 so far.
Before you really get into this, I'm guessing that the number of people having to do this has probably increased over this last period of time.
It has, right? And that's what the numbers really are showing. They're up, and maybe that's because of inflation, or maybe that's because of job insecurity, or a combination of them. But the number of people tapping into their 401ks has indeed increased as of the second quarter of 2023. About just shy of 16,000 employees took hardship distributions from their company-sponsored accounts in the second quarter. That's 12% increase over the previous quarter. It's a, get this, Ron, 36% increase from last year.
Wow.
So we're going to dive into what a hardship distribution is, right? And when and why we would take this in a bit. But here, let me give you just a couple more numbers before so we can get a perspective of how big this issue is.
Okay.
When folks dig into their 401k, the average withdrawal is about $5,000. Last quarter, it was about $5,100. Last year, about $5,400. So right in this $5,000 to $5,500 range when people are taking a withdrawal from their 401k. That's about 2.5% of 401k participants borrowed from their plan.
Okay.
Okay. If folks take a loan, and we're going to distinguish today the difference between a loan, borrowing from the plan, or a withdrawal. The average loan from their 401k was about $8,500. So that's where we sit.
Mm-hmm. I guess, all of these things are life events that are happening that they did not anticipate, and sometimes they don't even have any other way to take care of them except for doing these withdrawals that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they either didn't plan, and in moving forward, we can maybe build out a plan so that if something like this happens in the future, you don't have to touch your 401k. Mm-hmm. One of the ways to do that is to actually build out an emergency fund.
So now that we're through those numbers, and those are some mighty impressive numbers, what exactly are we talking about here? What are you looking at here?
Yeah, so when we look at those numbers, Chase and I, one of the things, there's three takeaways that we see from those that I'll point out here. First is that this year more employees are prioritizing short-term expenses over saving for the long term. Make sense?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all by that.
Now, the second thing we see there is people are looking for ways to actively tap into their retirement savings without a penalty, so we're going to address that today.
Okay.
The third thing, and this is a but, and a big but here, right? Even if that's going on in your life, it is still critical that we continue contributing and investing in our retirement savings. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't, when you get to retirement, it won't matter all this other stuff that happened. You won't have enough money.
So we know that generally speaking, workers can start withdrawing from their retirement plans at the age of 59 and a half. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if people experience a financial emergency or are experiencing hard times like we just talked about, their savings and their retirement accounts may be the only access to a solution that they have. It's the only thing they can do.
Yep, you're exactly right. So let's talk about some of the options here. And what they mean to you if it's your 401k. Let's circle back. I mentioned it a little earlier. Let's circle back to what's called a hardship withdrawal. Mm-hmm. This is a way, Ron, to access your retirement account, your 401k, for example, and avoid paying the 10% early distribution tax in certain circumstances. Now, just a review, you had mentioned earlier, when you put money in your 401k, it's designed to not touch it until you're at least 59 and a half. Got it?
Right.
Right. If you pull it out before 59 and a half, not only do you have to pay tax on the money, which isn't a penalty, right? You've never paid tax on this money, so taxes are due if you do a withdrawal. But if you take it out before 59 and a half, the federal government penalizes you 10%. So it's a huge hit. taxes plus penalty, you could lose, 40% of the money you're withdrawing. So we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're talking about here are hardship withdrawals. The government has set up certain situations where you might be able to take a withdrawal and avoid at least the 10% penalty. Okay. It's called an immediate and heavy financial need. This situation may qualify. I'm going to list a couple of them. Sound good? The ones that would qualify the way the government set it up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what all these are.
Yeah, so number one, if you need money for this year for medical care, it can be for you, Ron, it can be for your spouse, it can be for a dependent or a beneficiary. If you need that, you can take the withdrawal and avoid the 10% penalty.
Okay.
You can take it for costs directly related to the purchase of a principal residence. Now, I want to be clear here, that doesn't include a mortgage payment.
All right.
But let's say you needed that money for a down payment or maybe closing costs or things like that.
Okay.
You can take it for tuition, educational fees. You could take it for room and board expenses for the next 12 months. And that's a key for the next 12 months, right? Okay. If you're taking it for post-secondary education, think college, right? For you, for your spouse, for your children. Again, you can do it for dependents, for beneficiaries.
Okay. Makes sense.
You can take the money out to prevent eviction from your primary residence, not from a second home. You can take it to prevent foreclosure on your home mortgage. You can take it for funeral expenses for you, for your spouse, for your children and dependents. Okay, and there's certain very specific times, which we won't get into today, but just know that this is out there, where you can take it for repairs or damage to your primary residence.
Well, I'm glad there's some opportunities that folks can use to avoid the penalty and the taxation, because these are some really bad situations.
Yeah, let me jump in there because I want to make sure I'm clear on this. I'm glad you just said that. These heavy financial needs, these hardship withdrawals, allow you to avoid, Ron, the 10% IRS penalty. Mm-hmm. It's a withdrawal. You're still paying the tax.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right. So you take $10,000 out of this. If you're paying, for example, 24% federal tax and 6% state, for example, that's pretty common, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's 30%. So you take $10,000 out. You don't pay a $1,000 penalty, but you still have to pay 30% taxes. So you end up with $7,000.
Okay.
And as a withdrawal, we can't put the money back in later.
Or if you had to, add a penalty onto that, that would be, almost not worth doing because there would be so much of it gone.
That's exactly right. You add a penalty, now you're taking 40% out of your savings to take a withdrawal. That is too painful. It's still painful to pay the tax, right? Because if you're already working, that means you're probably in the next money that shows up on your tax return is at an even higher tax bracket. Mm-hmm. Right. So we want to avoid that if we can, because I don't want to be taking out, in this example, $10,000 just so I can get my hands on $7,000. It's almost like your stock's losing 30% right off the bat.
Are there any other options for people to avoid that big penalty?
Yes, of course, I'm always recommending not touching this money, but we're talking here about you have no other choice. This one, if you can pull it off, I like much better. You can access your 401k depending on your plan. It depends on how the plan's written. Remember, every 401k is specific to the company that offers it. Mm-hmm. So they set the rules, right? So the government tells them what they can and can't do, but they don't have to do everything the government lists. So most 401ks allow you to take a loan from your 401k if you need it. Very different from a withdrawal, right? So the 401k loan doesn't have all those limitations for hardship or anything like that. You can take the money out at your discretion.
Okay.
Okay. Some plans don't allow it.
Right. Just depends on the individual, who has that individual plan, right?
Yeah, and they also limit how much you can take. So it's often like you can't take more than 50% of your account value out in a loan. So if you had $100,000 in your 401k, your plan may only allow you to take a $50,000 loan. Mm-hmm. Others may just limit it to maybe no more than $10,000 because they're trying to set it up so that you don't deplete your savings before you retire. So they're all a little different. So you would want to check with your 401k provider to see what the rules are for you. All right, but here's why they, in my opinion, would be the choice I would go to before a withdrawal. A loan, Ron, from your 401k does not incur the 10% penalty.
Okay.
And it's not taxable. Very different from a withdrawal. So you take a $10,000 loan out of your 401k, there is no tax. You get the whole $10,000. It doesn't show up on your tax return. There's no penalty.
Okay. That's good
now,
news.
the drawback is you're paying interest on that loan, and that's set up by your 401k plan, right? But even though you're paying interest, since it's a loan, think of it more as not pulling money out of your 401k. It's just the 401k is loaning you money, and they're using your 401k plan as collateral. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, it makes perfect sense.
So if you're taking a loan, even though you're paying interest on the money, in theory, your 401k money is still there generating interest. So with luck, if your 401k has a good return, it may be enough to cover the loan costs.
Okay.
Right? Even if it doesn't quite get it, it might offset some of the loan costs.
This is a fascinating conversation we're having today, and if you want to get in touch with Dave Lopez and have a conversation about similar circumstances, call 540-720-5656. That is ILG Financial, Stafford, Virginia, ilgfinancial.com. That's a website, 540-720-5656 is your number to call. So, Dave, we're seeing people have to take money out of their retirement savings in a less than ideal situation, but it happens for a lot of folks. What is the outlook on contributing to retirement savings accounts in this inflation and cost rising environment that we're all finding ourselves having to cope with right now?
Yeah, so let's address that. Do you mind if I backtrack just a bit, Ron?
Oh, no, not at all.
So I want to go back just a little to when we were talking about borrowing from your 401k.
Okay.
Here's why I like this plan the most. And this is something that an advantage you get if you have somebody, a financial advisor, working with you. They can bring up ideas like this that you may not have thought about. But remember how I told you with the withdrawal, you can't put the money back in? Mm-hmm. Well, with the loan, you can, right? You can pay the loan back. Okay. So you can actually take a $10,000, for example. Let's say you needed $10,000 today for an emergency, Ron.
Right.
You could take it out, no penalty, no taxes, use the $10,000. And together we could work out a way, just like if you borrowed from the bank, to pay that back.
Okay.
Well, if you're paying it back, you're paying yourself back, right? So you're paying back your retirement, your future retirement bucket, so that down the road when you do retire, there's no ill effects from that loan. There's no difference than if you had never taken it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so you just treat it like it's a loan to any other institution. We set up a pay plan. We allocate a little extra money from your paycheck to pay it back over time. You stick to the payback plan, just like if it was a car payment or a mortgage. But instead of somebody else getting rich off interest on your loan, it's allowing your bucket to continue to grow. In effect, you are loaning to yourself.
Now, that's wonderful news.
Okay, so if that ever happened, what I would say is get with your financial professional before you take the withdrawal or the loan. Let them walk through these options and walk through, well, what's the plan to get the money back in there so we are back on track and don't miss a beat.
You know, that's a very important point you just made. If you try to do these things on your own, there's a possibility that you're not going to do it correctly, and it's going to cost you down the road. But it's so important to get in touch with your financial professional like Dave Lopez at ILG Financial.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If obviously, if we're not your contact, your advisor, you want to find one that's a good fit, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so where did we left off? You were talking about, I think last time you were talking about taking money out again of retirement savings.
Yeah, what's the outlook on contributing to retirement savings accounts during this particular inflationary time that we have right now?
Yeah, it's a tough time, right? Inflation's squeezing the budget. A lot of times what folks do now is they'll just, to make ends meet, they'll stop contributing, which is a grave error. If there's, you want to look for any way other to invest. There's an age-old saying that you probably heard from your parents or grandparents. It's an age-old saying because it's true and it works, and it's pay yourself first.
Yeah, That's
right?
exactly. I read your mind. I knew you were going to say that.
Yep. And so what that means for folks listening is you need to treat your retirement contribution, your 401k contribution, like a bill, like a mortgage bill, right? Like the electric bill. And you don't give a second thought every month to should I pay that or not. You have to pay that or there's going to be repercussions. Mm-hmm. We recommend you treat your retirement savings that we've agreed on in advance, the amount based on your budget. Treat that like the first bill that has to be paid before anything else.
Okay. Right.
And then you will find a way to make the other stuff happen. Whereas if you put paying your retirement last, then you find a way to spend the money, and then that's the one that's dropped off the list one month because of an emergency. So pay yourself first is the first thing that we want to do. If inflation creeps in, then if you're assuming that you've got to make this $1,000 a month contribution to your 401k, that's non-negotiable, your brain will start to look for other solutions, right? Do I take a side job? Do I look for something else? Is there some luxury that I have to cut out temporarily until we can either earn more money, get a raise, or something else? But you want to make sure that the first step isn't to stop savings, because otherwise you will pay the penalty down the road when it's time to retire and the money's not there.
You can't think of it as optional. You need to get into the mindset where it's mandatory. This is something I have to do.
Yeah, and of course, that's easy for you and I to say on a podcast. So the question usually you'll get is, Dave, easy to say, but look at my budget. How do I do it? That's why you want to get with your financial provider and say, let's dig back into my income plan. We do comprehensive income plans for our clients, and most fiduciary firms will if they focus on retirement planning. Mm-hmm. Where you dig into where's the income, where's the budget. We get a detailed budget from our clients so we can look at it together and look for ways that we can tweak their budget to allow them to save the money that we need to save for retirement. But you have to be able to look at the operating machine if we're going to tweak it. Just like if you were looking at an engine, I got to be able to pop the hood up and look at your engine to make recommendations for changes. I can't do it with the hood down.
You have any numbers that you want to throw at us again? Because we started out this whole conversation talking about this recent study that you wanted to share with us, but are there any other numbers that you need to tell folks about today?
Yeah, these might help just to give folks some perspective, right? Remember when I talked about the numbers earlier, we were talking about more people dipping into their 401ks, whether it's withdrawals or loans, and they're being pinched, and we can play with why. But here was the sentiment with a survey of why people were doing it and what they thought how they felt their current situation was. People feel right now the need to save more to fund for a comfortable retirement. So that's interesting, isn't it? Right? We're struggling to find ways to keep contributing and not taking out of our 401k. Mm-hmm. Yet the same people think not only should I continue to save in my 401k, to get the retirement I need, my belief is I actually need to be saving more.
Yeah.
Right. The second thing the numbers show is that workers feel that they need to save an average of $1.8 million for retirement. Last year, the average they thought they needed to save for retirement was $1.7 million. So you see the trend there? Yeah. People think I need more for retirement. So we need to find ways to put more in and get better returns over time than less. And that's contrary to pulling money out. Only 37% of workers, Ron, think that it is very likely that they'll achieve their target of saving for retirement.
That's not a lot of optimism there, for sure.
Guess what? Last year, 47%, just under half, thought they were going to hit their target. Wow. So actually, people are less optimistic that they're going to have enough in retirement than they were last year. And I think that has to do with the volatile economic times and the inflation and all these pressures on folks.
Yeah, all this talk about inflation and interest rates being high and all that sort of thing, that has really kind of eroded folks' confidence.
It is. Now, if there's a silver lining to that, the numbers say that employee contributions to their 401ks over the first half of 2023 have held steady at about 6.5%, which means for the most part, we get the big picture, which is I've got to keep saving, the whole pay yourself first. Mm-hmm. So my advice to the folks listening is keep doing that, right? Yeah. If you're listening and you're trying to help your children out who are young folks in the workforce, tell them keep paying yourself first. There's not a better piece of advice I can give you to prepare for retirement. If you're 20 or 30 or 40, figure any other way. Ask people for other ways how we can make this happen without pulling money out of your 401k and allowing you to keep contributing to your 401k.
Well, it sounds like with this inflation that we have going on right now and what's likely to be long-term inflationary situation, it's still important to try and cut costs as opposed to cutting out saving.
It is true, but to be fair, it's still full. Life is still full of unavoidable situations and unavoidable costs. We talked about that. Wheels still fall off the car, no matter how well you've prepared. So as long as you have a plan in place, and I would add, I highly recommend a financial professional partnering with you, one that you trust, that has your best interests in mind, that can help look at options for you, because there are options, Ron. There are ways to get through some of these harder times where certain areas of your finances may have taken a hit. But as always, the best option is to plan ahead for an emergency so you don't have to raid a retirement account.
If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. That's what
you got
I
it.
always say. Yeah.
Right? So you want to get with your financial planner first, right? And say, hey, I like this plan, but if the wheel falls off, Dave talked about the wheel falling off, what's the plan? And hopefully, they've built in an emergency fund. We all do with our clients to try to help temporarily in that situation.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I think I've learned a lot from today's conversation. I would assume that our listeners feel the same. It's kind of a tough time for a lot of folks right now, and there are certain principles you need to keep in mind always. Pay yourself first. That's the one thought that sticks out at me of what you said today. Pay yourself first, and then worry about all this other stuff later.
Yep, that's what I would do. And then don't hesitate to get help. You do not have to do this alone.
Yeah. Well, Dave, anything else you want to point out to folks today before we wrap up today's podcast?
No, I think we covered it today. Thanks for joining me. I sure appreciate doing this with you.
Really informative stuff. Thank you so much. Income, legacy, growth. It's all right here at ILG Financial, and it's about helping you plan for retirement your way so you can achieve your financial goals. Call ILG Financial at 540-720-5656, or you can go online to ilgfinancial.com to learn more. This has been the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez. I'm Ron Stutz. Thank you so much for listening. The information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and do not necessarily represent the views of the Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Alpha Star and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability.